Hi there, this is another video accompanying the Joomla tutorial series developing an MVC component, and in this step we're looking at adding checkout. Now after a few steps where it's been quite challenging stuff, it's nice to have a little break and do something a bit more straightforward. Checkout, as you're no doubt aware, is enabled to avoid the situation where two users are trying to edit the same record. So if we go on here and we click a record and we go into editing it, and we come on to another user, which I've got on another browser here, and I'll just do refresh here. You can see it comes up with a little padlock symbol there, really indicating that this record is locked in inverted commas. It's checked out to this user and basically stay away from it. So if you've gone through the code in the tutorial, you know that the two key lines are basically these two, because the very fact of introducing these two fields into the database record switches on all of the, well, practically all of the checkout functionality for us, which is really good news. So we don't really have a lot to do, and whenever we click on some record like this and go in to check it out, all of that stuff is handled by the core Joomla code for us. So we have very little to do, and as it says in the step, the main thing is to get this little symbol displayed. This is a different tab, so this should come up here as well. Just get this little symbol displayed, showing that the record is checked out. There it's also got who checked it out and when it was checked out. So in terms of our code, we have got in our model, we have to get the two fields, and that's really for the tooltip. And then in our view, we're adding this check-in button. And if we go back here, you can see this check-in button here. This is what we've added here. Now it's a bit of a question, what should we require in terms of permissions? Well, really what we've got here is if someone can edit records, then it could be that they've accidentally checked out a record and not checked it back in again. How can that happen? Well, if you go on here and you just press the back key on your browser, then you don't press the cancel and then the record is still left checked out. So you want to have the ability to check in, to click on that and check that record in if you're in the business of editing records. Or I've put also here, if you have got core manage on com.checkin, and com.checkin is really the functionality you get when you do system global check-in. And this is what it looks like here. It'll basically show a number of records and a number of tables, and will allow someone with this privilege to check those back in and force those back in again. Incidentally, I maybe should have mentioned earlier that here we're building up a toolbar entity, but you may have noticed that in our layout file, we never actually render this. We render the sidebar here, but we never actually render the toolbar. And that's because it isn't really rendered in our layout file. It's rendered separately by the template. So if we go into our code and let's pick Hello World Administrator template. We've got the ISIS template here, and it'll run index.php. So if we look at that and we look down towards the bottom, and here is where it's rendering our component. So all of this stuff down here is our component, and that's what it's rendering in this here. Here it's rendering the message So you know when you use enqueue message, there's a message bar that appears kind of up here. That's what's being rendered there. And then if we look up a bit here in this subheader section, this is where it's actually rendering the toolbar. So it's actually rendered separately by the template, which is why whenever we wanted to have kind of like a view and a modal which didn't have the toolbar, we used this component.php template. And if you look down here, it's got the component, it's got the message, but it hasn't got the toolbar. So it doesn't render the toolbar if you do tmpl equals component. So that's just a little aside. And then we really come down to the layout, which again is fairly straightforward. We're just really checking if the row is checked out here so that we know to put in the little padlock symbol. And we're checking also, is this person privileged to has the privilege to check it back in again? And we're checking against core.manage on com check-in, on the global check-in, or if the row has been checked out by the current user, we'll obviously allow him to check back in again. Even though there is this little bug in Joomla where it really checks in the com check-in, or sorry, in the code, it checks against core admin. But hopefully we'll get that fixed. So that's that. And if we look at our functionality, really all of that check-in sort of stuff is enabled by Joomla kind of behind the scenes. So let's have a quick look and see what that code looks like. And I've drawn a picture here. Now when you go in to edit a record, you can see down the bottom here where it's going. Let me just do that again. Sorry, it's not coming up too well. There it is, down there. You can see option equals comp hello world, task equals hello world dot edit and the ID. And it will come into the code here and it will look for a function called edit in our hello world controller, and that's the one which is in the controllers subdirectory. And there's nothing there, so it will go into the class that we inherit from. So I've put our kind of like inheritance hierarchy on the controller here in these kind of sort of yellow boxes, and I've gone over to using the new names. So we really inherit from, I think it's JController form, and that inherits from JController legacy, but these are all renamed with a view of going to Joomla version 4. And incidentally, if you're interested in finding out how they are renamed, if you go into the libraries and you look at a class map file there, and you'll see all of the old names down the left and the new names on the right. Like for example, JModel Legacy is now called Base Database Model, and it actually tells you where you'll find the source code, CMS MVC model. So you can go along to the libraries, source, it's on the source MVC model, and you can find Base Database Model there. So back to this. So as I say, in our form controller, we've got an edit there, and that controller really finds the model and calls checkout on the model, and the model it will find will be our hello world model. We don't have a checkout there, so it will go into the one that we inherit from, which is JModel admin. Excuse me. And that ends up calling the parent, which is in the form model or JModel form, which calls table checkout, and that goes to our JTable. class, which actually implements the checkout by writing those two records, or sorry, two fields to the database record that we have up here. So it will write values into those two fields, and that's how we know that a record has been checked out. Similarly, whenever we are in here and we do save or close, we will end up doing hello world.save, and save will come into our form controller, and it will, in the same way as our edit, it will call a model function, and in this case it's check-in. And check-in we don't have in our hello world model, but we'll find it in admin model, which we inherit from, and it calls the parent check-in, which will be in the form model, which will call the JTable functionality and clear those two fields in our database record. And obviously the same for cancel. So as I say, a lot of this stuff is done automatically for us behind the scenes. The other thing to look at is forcing check-in. And when we do a click on the padlock symbol, we're actually forcing a check-in. So you can see here, this is both super user, this is the same user. If I go to Chrome, this is the same, sorry, this is a user called manager who has got privilege to, it's got core manage privilege on ComCheckIn, and on here I've got just a different user who hasn't got that privilege. So if I refresh this on Edge, Microsoft Edge, you'll see that this is grayed out, so there's nothing there to check, or nothing there to click. But when we do click something like that, you can see down to the left that it's just JavaScript void. So the kind of HTTP request is generated by the JavaScript, and if we clear that and click on this and look on our network, there's what it's sending. And we look at that in a bit more detail, and we find that it's going to option equals com hello world view equals hello worlds. And then if we look at the params, we see down here the key thing, which is its task equals hello worlds.checkin. So if we have a look for the code there, here's our hierarchy again for, in this case it's hello worlds, hello worlds.checkin, which is really reflecting the overall view like this here. And it's calling then check-in, and the check-in gets the model. However, in our case here, if you look at your code in the Hello Worlds controller, you'll find that it sets up the model to be the Hello World model, not the Hello Worlds model. So the Hello Worlds model is kind of like a list for getting all of the records here, whereas the Hello World model without the S is really associated with editing things and changing things. So we really end up with the same model as we had here. And in the same way, it'll try the check-in and it will go through the same functionality and end up with writing the blanks to those two database fields to indicate that the record is now checked in. So as I say, a lot of functionality there for us, and we don't have to do a lot of work. There is, however, one little problem, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to check this out again. So I'm going to edit this. Now this is now checked out, so if I go to Chrome, say, and refresh, we should see the symbol again. Yeah. And I can click on this to edit it. So even though it's actually checked out to somebody else and it's coming up with a message there, checkout failed, right, I can go in and I can actually change it. I can change the alias to XXXX as I have done in the past there and save. And then if I go back here, now you see it's still, when you do a save, it will try to do a check-in. But if I go back here and click on it again to refresh, you should see this changing, and it does. You can see that they change, the alias has been changed to au revoir with 4 X's after it. So even though it's checked out, it's allowing me to change the record here. And when I click on close, it fails again. Check-in failed. So on the close, it's trying to do a check-in, but it's failing again because basically this user hasn't got access. It's not the same user as has checked out the record, so the check-in basically fails. But worse than that, it kind of leaves me here. So even though I click on close and cancel, I don't get back to the old screen, and basically I have to use the browser's button to get back. So that is a little bit of a problem with our code. So let's see how Joomla Core manages that situation. And unfortunately it's not too well. So here is, this is just a clean instance of Joomla 3.8.12, and it's got the sample data with basically some of the international stuff as well, international sample data. So if I click on that article there, which is just the first one, and I go again to Chrome, and again it's a manager who's logged in here, whereas over here it's the super user. And I refresh this, we should see the little symbol appearing to say it's checked out. Indeed, there it is. And when I click on it, wait for it, checkout failed with the following error. The user checking out does not match the user who checked out the item. And then it's got this other thing here. You are not permitted to use that link to directly access that page, #74. So what's going on there? Well, what is happening is that it's using something called edit IDs. So if we go on to the next slide here, we have, when we clicked the record to edit, we got a task equals hello world.edit and an ID passed up 123. And then what happens is it gives a redirect and it gets the browser to display the form, which is basically layout.edit, or the layout equals edit. But as part of its edit functionality here, it's doing a model checkout, and if the checkout succeeds, then it's calling this function here hold edit ID, and hold edit ID is in our base controller, and I've got the inheritance now going this way instead of up the page. But it's got a function there, hold edit ID, and what it does is it stores the ID in the session, and we can have a look at that. If we go to the session, and we go back here, and hopefully there it is, the session there, default session. So if I go to com content, here's com content, and here's edit, article ID 74, and that has arisen from this call here, hold edit ID. And if we go back and we see 74 there, and we know 74 is what the ID of that record is. And if we look, this is here Chrome. If we looked in the session here, this is the manager session, and we see that there's no equivalent, there's no registry entry there for, it's just user registry session. There's nothing for com content there. So what has happened is it has come in to this to display the form, and com content overrides the form controller here, which has the display function, and in its display function it calls check edit ID, and it's basically checking if that ID is stored in the session. And if it isn't stored in the session, it gives this message, which is, if I can get back to Chrome, this one here, you're not permitted to use that link. So it's really kind of like a check that the user has gone through the proper path of actually going through here before you get to here. You could actually try to display this directly, and what Joomla is doing here is making sure that you don't display this directly. And I think probably the main reason for that is that you then avoid the checkout. So if you're able to display this directly, you avoid going through the checkout. And then whenever you pass, whenever you click on save or cancel, it comes in, and the form controller function edit, it calls release edit ID, and that will remove the ID from the session. So if we go on to, this is where we've got it editing, and this is com content edit article 74. And if we go and press close, and then we'll look again at the session. Com content edit article ID, and you can see it's now blank. So it actually removed the ID from the session. So if we look at our hello world, here's our hello world, and we're editing au revoir, and it is ID 118, as you can see over here. So we can look at our session here, and we go down to com hello world edit, and there's our ID. So in behind the scenes, for us, for our hello world functionality, it's actually gone and used this session ID and stored this ID into the session. Now what we haven't done is we haven't overridden the display, so we haven't done any check of the ID. But again, whenever we cancel it, it will release the edit ID. So that's one possibility, is to, if we want to fix up this problem of editing the record, we could follow what com content does, and really in our display we can override the standard display and check the edit ID and come out in that way. Let's look now at menus, and menus take a different approach. Here we've got menus. So if I go on here, this is the super user. I click on the home menu, and then I'll go over to Chrome. Once that stops, I'll refresh this. There we go. And you can see it's locked there. It's been checked out by another user. However, if we click on that, now usually a manager won't have access to the menus here, but you can very easily go into the menus permissions and set up the manager to have access to administration interface. Checkout failed with the following error as we expect. And there's no save here, but there's a save new. So we can actually go along and add this home page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and save a new. And then if we go back here, this is editing the record. Let's just click on menus, all menu items here. Okay. So we can see that the record is checked out, okay, but look here, we've gone in on another session, different from the user who's actually checked out the record, and we've changed the record. And then if we try clicking close, cancel, we'll basically find it'll try and check in, but because it's failed to check in, it will prevent us really from returning to the main menu. So menus really isn't a lot better. In fact, it's worse because you get into the situation where you can't get out of this. You get into a form that you can't get out of, and you really have to press the back button there to get you back to a sensible place. So some of the strategies you might consider then for editing checked out records. So one possibility would be we could show the greeting as text rather than a link. So in our layout file, we could check, is this record checked out to somebody else? And instead of displaying like a link there, we could just put home as text. And that means there'd be no way of editing it apart from kind of generating a URL yourself. That would be one possibility. The second possibility would be in controller.php, override display and call check edit ID. So that really is the same as com content. The disadvantage is it's a bit of a unintuitive error message that actually appears. The third possibility is, well, you may want to have your records displayed in a read-only fashion, and I've coded up something like that for this case, and I'll just install that. So basically what I'm doing here is in our view, wherever we generate the this set of the toolbar here, what I've got is, will this work? Okay, so still got checkout failed, but what I've got is that this record is checked out. You can view it but not change it. So I've looked for the case where it's not the same person who's checked out the record, and if that's the case, I've removed all of the buttons except for close. And then when you click close, you go back to the back to this here. Okay, so that's the third possibility, is display the record as read only, and in the hello world view, check if it's checked out to someone else, and if so, only out the cancel button, that's that close button there. And then in the controller, override the cancel, and if the record is checked out to someone else, then don't attempt to check in, and you'll really just then return to the view. So you might want to have a go at coding up some of those possibilities and see what you prefer. But basically that's about it for this tutorial, and thanks very much for watching. Bye.